Subscribe, motherfucker.
What is a chiptune? Nothing but a miserable pile of simple waveforms that go together in such a way that seems like it's going to be something actually kind of cool that reminisces something from the retro days of the 80s, particularly towards something like the Nintendo Entertainment System.
What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Today we're going to be learning some of the ins and outs of how to make a Castlevania-inspired chiptune that sounds kind of like this. So if you like this tune, then stick around and be sure to give me a like and subscribe. Typically, I don't do stuff like this. I usually do things that are more of the neuro-bass and heavier aspect of things, but I wanted to take a break just because I've done so many bass videos and drum videos over the last, 2-3 years that I kind of wanted to explore something different. The cool thing about chiptune is the fact that it is a lot easy. It's one of the most accessible genres to get into. And the reason why is because all you have to do essentially is get your hands on some MIDI chord progressions, get your hands on some melodies, and then just use really simple waveforms to which you can easily access either by samples or by your DAW's most basic synthesizer that's available. Everything has a sine wave, everything has a square wave, everything usually has a saw wave, XYZ. If you don't know what those are, then go check out like a very basic like sound design intro and stuff. But that's kind of what chiptune is it's very 8-bit, and what 8-bit is just means that there's like a bit depth to quality, so that means that you can't have like super high fidelity sounds whenever this is playing. But because we live in such a digital age now, we're kind of looking at things of doing it in reverse. Like we have access to make the most amazing crazy things that you've never heard, which is usually what I like to spend my time doing. But sometimes it's nice to strip away all of the elements of feeling like you have to do crazy sound design, of feeling like you have to do crazy mixing, crazy arrangement stuff in order to like have a tune that's, you know what I mean, fun to listen to. So we're going to start this video with the arrangement aspect of it, and I'm going to tackle the thing that I'm actually weakest at, which is music theory. And we will talk about a little bit of sound design aspects to this, but really I kind of just want to introduce like the mindset about what goes behind like a Castlevania type tune in the realm of like chiptune and stuff. And so to me, the reason why I like Castlevania music so much is for the fact that it has this amazing blend of genres, right? So like the biggest influence that it takes is kind of like the Bach-inspired classical music with a lot of like crazy, like brooding sounding melodies. But then it will take something that's kind of upbeat or something that is inspired from like rock or jazz or something and kind of mix it together in such a way that seems seamless, so to speak. So for the most part, the biggest thing that I want to talk to you guys about is just the use of modes. And I'm not going to go super in depth into it because I'm worried that I'm going to say something that I'm afraid of coming off of not knowing what I'm talking about. But what I've pretty much done is played this in A minor, and from this point, I've kind of just allowed myself to try to find the notes that or places that I can break. So for example, if we listen to this part right here, everything for the most part is going to sound like it's an A minor. That note right there, that D sharp, slowly changes the mode from going from A minor into something that is kind of a little bit more mysterious or darker in that sense. And so between A minor, to kind of summarize things, I am playing in between modes of melodic, harmonic, and Phrygian, just in very small nuanced places that allow me to have a little bit more variation and kind of add to that sound. Now, the other thing that I want to make sure that like like a really cool place to practice this is making sure that I add these elements towards like the end. And that's how like a really cool way that you can either use this as a transition, or you can use it to like either change keys or to go into a completely different mode. So everything here is, bang on in A minor. And then I kind of use this as a small change to hint that there's something more to this. There's something more mysterious about it of just being like super normal. And then I do it again right here. So that particular melody right there really complements this D sharp 4 right here. Right? And those are just little things and little tricks that you can use, even if you don't necessarily know the modes or the, scales or whatever within music theory in itself. Now, there is one other concept that I do want to talk about, and that's what I have come to learn as an ostinato, but I don't really necessarily know if that's the actual correct term. But in this part right here, where everything is most exciting, you've got this octave that's playing. And then in between that, you've got the secondary melody that's playing this arpeggio. So this little ending right here is obviously kind of keeping things within that, I would say, harmonic minor aspect of this. But this little cool part right here kind of comes from that idea of something that you would be inspired from Bloody Tears. And I'm going to play this on guitar just because I don't actually have like a full keyboard to play this with, but I will play kind of like the riff in a different key of Bloody Tears, and you'll kind of get this feeling about how to write something kind of like this. So if I were to just play this in this aspect, it would sound something kind of like this. But you can see that it always returns to that root note, and then on the top, an actual melody is playing, something along those lines. But because you actually have that low note here, I think that you would say that it's a tool to build tension with, and that's something that I really enjoy with that kind of music in the world of Castlevania in general. So moving on to that kind of stuff, whenever you're doing things like this, in the grander scheme of arrangement, the cool reason why I like doing chiptunes sometimes is because I don't really have to worry about making the craziest transitions with crazy fills and stuff as possible. There are a couple of things that we have here, kind of like this little, I guess, kick fill or this little tom fill. But for the most part, everything that kind of segues is more so relying on the melody or the rhythm of getting into the next part. And for example, whenever this picks up and goes into that part that we just played, you'll see that I kind of alternate between, but you can see that I'm picking up the rhythm here, and then it goes into that full section. And that's like a really simple thing that you can do. And the reason why this should be super useful to you is because it allows you to take inspiration from a bunch of different songs. It opens up the door because so many other types of genres of music and stuff have this same kind of, I guess, tricks or same kind of tools that they use in order to transition from part to part. So what it comes from there, whenever you're making stuff like this, is really just getting into the idea of creating one part, a second part, a third part, a fourth part, and then a fifth or sixth or whatever. Or you could just keep it at all four of these or go into something that's kind of like a solo. But all you have to do is start with the drum beat, grab yourself an easy sound, kind of like this, and just write a melody to it. And that is like the easiest way to get started. And kind of like on that sense as well, whatever scale you pick this in, go ahead and add a simple bass line. And so whenever you kind of have those things playing together, just with a few different elements, you can kind of see that you don't have to go very far in order to get something sounding, super fun, or at least in the world of chiptune in that sense. So if you have any other questions about like specific arrangement stuff, obviously I can't tell you how to actually like write the melodies and stuff of, this particular type of music, but hopefully that's a couple of things that will get you in the realm of not only creating Castlevania type vibes, but also just chiptune in general. So the next thing I want to actually talk about are the drums, because I actually don't have a lot of chiptune drums. Actually, I don't really think that I have any, so I made my own. So what I did was I came on over here and I started with the simple 808 kick, or a simple 808 drum thing. I think this is actually a preset called like 808 something. And if you just take a listen, this is what it sounds like. And the reason why 808s work really well is because they're already actually, for the most part, simple waveforms. Now, I did change the clap because this was actually just an 808 snare, and I've kind of just added a couple of these things to it. This really isn't important because we're going to throw a bit crusher on there in the first place, but you'll see that as soon as I turn the bit crusher on, it's going to sound a lot different. Obviously, even if I didn't do anything else to these drums, the bit crusher in its own right can really help you get the lo-fi drum sound that you want. I would say that the best way to try to come about making these these chiptune drums is to make sure that you're using synthetic drums, whether it be an 808 or just something that you can probably make in a synthesizer, and then add the bit crushing to it because it's just going to kind of make it a lot easier to do. I've taken the width off, and then this is kind of just tuning to taste, but I've kind of left everything at 100% mix. So that way now both the kick and the clap sound like it's just white noise. Now, the next thing I did is more of a mixing aspect to it, but I've just clipped the heck out of these drums, and that's just to kind of make sure that everything is even. You can see if I were to take everything off up here that the drum aspect to it would have a lot of different peaks and all that. So by clipping the heck out of it in that way, it kind of gives it a consistent level. And the reason why this is okay is because like in chiptune, you don't really have a lot of dynamics. So everything can kind of be the same energy, right? And that's also really cool is you don't really have to worry about the mixing aspect of it. I would even argue that I probably don't even need that, but let's just say that it's there for that sake. Now I've clipped off everything below 40 hertz on this just because I didn't really want the boominess of the kick, and like you can have it if you want to, but I find that it's not really necessary. And then this is a transient shaper that's just making sure that the tail end of this is a little bit tighter, and so now these are going to be a little bit smackier. So that's a really easy way to get that kind of thing. So when it comes to the sound design of the rest of the, I guess, instruments here, there's a couple of things that I did do. For example, the main melody line right here, I've added an amp, some EQ, and made sure that it's in mono. But the biggest thing that you kind of want to keep in mind with this is that you just want to keep it simple. I mean, this is actually a preset from, I'm just going to say Evi, and they had a bunch of stuff on here, but what I did was kind of take everything off, just keep a simple filter on here, and then kind of use these tools here just to give it a little bit of, I guess, pizzazz. Now, one cool thing about Faceplant in general is that it has this pulse width, and that means that it can change the width of the square. So if I were to play something like this, and we go toward the middle, you'll see that that sounds more so like a regular square. So by messing with this, you can get that kind of nasally, I guess, like thin square type sound. And if you want to get creative with it, you can even automate something like that. But this sound, again, is incredibly simple. Now, the next thing that I did was I actually did this one from scratch, I believe. It's not too crazy or anything, but it's got a little bit of, okay, this is also a preset, but it's got a little bit of detuning or a little bit of stereo to it, but it's very subtle and turned down a lot. And that's just to give it just a little bit of depth and space over that, because I think that if you have something like an extra layer, then it can sound a lot nicer. But the hope for this is that you probably shouldn't be able to hear it unless if it's gone, if that makes sense, right? And arguably you don't need something like this. You can just keep it simple, but sometimes layering synths in that way can be useful if you feel like it needs more beef. And you can always just come into something like this and add another oscillator or whatever, but that's just kind of what I did. The other main component that I have to this is the bass, which sounds like this. And all this is just a square with a low pass filter. So if I take off this stuff, that's pretty much it. So take a regular square wave and then add a low pass to it, and then the distortion aspect to it will give it that noise. And then pretty much from that point on, you've got all the elements that you need in order to create something like that. Everything else after this is very subtle and very simple. So for example, I've got this little thing that is like this, which is just a blip. You just take a square wave and you add in a envelope that goes to the pitch. So this is going up 12 before it goes back down. So that's why it sounds bloop bloop. Then we've got this little thing right here, which is actually a choir, but I don't think that you can even hear it in the actual tune. But it's actually just a sample, but it's so quiet that, again, it just kind of adds a little bit of ambience, and if you ever catch it. This little thing right here is, again, just a square with some noise. This is also a square in that sense, and it's detuned with a large spread, so that way you've got these two kind of layers on top of that. The reverb on this is super minimal, and then I'm making sure to kind of like take off the high-end stuff, because if you don't, it's going to sound kind of like this, which is a little bit overbearing, right? So just by using a bandpass and kind of playing it around the same octave that you are in the frequency range, and then high passing it, you get that kind of smooth, subtle thing. The other thing that I wanted to bring to attention is the vibrato that you hear. So if I were to play a note on this, it's very subtle, but you can get kind of like that really cool sound in that sense. And if you want to get creative with it, you can even set an envelope to play this over time. So like, let's say I wanted this to come in from a sustain note, then I can grab this and go like that, and then that will actually make sure that the envelope activates, or the LFO activates, according to the envelope that I have here. So instead of it being vibrato all the time, once it reaches the sustain level or the hold level, it will actually introduce the vibrato at its max level, or like fade back out or something. So that's a cool little modulation trick that you can do. But even then, this is still a relatively simple sound. This little thing right here isn't a whole lot. It's just with two detuned voices, no spread, a little bit of reverb, but this kind of just kind of has that kind of pseudo organ type feel. That's kind of what I was going for. You can actually just use Bitwig's organ if you want, but in essence, the last thing that I have is just this cool little Reese, just because I have a hard time not making a tune with a Reese of some capacity. It's got a lot of sustain on it, but it's kind of just a nice little pulsing thing for the end of the tune. And after that, I think this might be the last thing. If we take a look right here, it's just, again, another detuned solid. Actually, I think this is the same thing. And then I'm playing octaves here to help build tension. So one cool thing that you might want to try, again, it's pretty easy to arrange, but sometimes I have a hard time writing melodies. So if you actually play another instrument, then sometimes that can actually help you write out what it is that you're trying to do. So I recorded this little part on guitar. And then I just kind of went into the MIDI here and then kind of replaced that. And I guess I kind of just wanted to bring this tip in just because sometimes it's like a lot easier to actually play something if you're naturally like oriented towards playing instruments as opposed to writing it on MIDI. But sometimes, like if you get stuck or whatever, playing along with that can help you with those kinds of ideas. So yeah, that's pretty much it for how to make a chip tune, also like how to get Castlevania vibes and stuff. You really will just want to have simple waveforms whenever you're creating things. You want to keep the parts relatively simple as well. Everything is 8 bars, 8 bars, 8 bars, 8 bars. It doesn't have to be, but it can also be that simple if you want it to be. Bit Crusher is your friend. And then for the Castlevania style melodies and movements and stuff, you kind of just want to look into taking a scale and then finding the different modes that you can play that with. Most of the time it's harmonic, melodic minor, and Phrygian modes, also Phrygian dominant as well, but that kind of also like blends into the flamenco style. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this. I feel like there's not a lot of information on YouTube about this, so if you like this video, then let me know. If you want me to cover something else, then let me know in the comments as well. And don't forget to subscribe, you dig. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!